Today, Maria Preston-Cargill will share best practices for advertising sales, including strategies for setting realistic revenue expectations, establishing pricing, and conveying customer value for print and digital products. She'll examine current trends and challenges in advertising sales and how these trends affect niche publishers today. Maria joined Allen Press in 2001 as publisher of a group of medical and dental journals. She currently manages our publishing department, which includes advertising sales, journal and society marketing, and publishing support. The Allen Press advertising sales team currently markets print and digital advertising vehicles for 23 societies and associations. Originally from the Kansas City area, Maria is a graduate of the University of Kansas, where she received a Bachelor of Science in Journalism and a Master's in Integrated Marketing Communications. Outside of work, Maria enjoys hiking, spending time with family, and tackling her long list of home improvement projects. I'm going to turn the presentation over to Maria now, and don't forget to send me your questions as we go.
So thank you, Joanna, and hello, everyone. So you've decided to sell advertising. Then you might already agree with this quote from a sales leader at the American Hospital Association when he says that advertising revenue plays an important role in the industry, and in fact, it may even add value for members. And today's webinar is going to be all about what you need to know and put in place in order to make an ad sales program successful for your organization. Our presentation today is really designed to help those of you who don't currently offer ad sales but want to know how to establish an ongoing program. And we hope it might also offer a fresh idea or two if any of you do have maybe smaller or newer programs and are experiencing challenges growing revenue, as many are. So today we're going to look at how you might monetize the assets you have, and that's really namely the audience and those that interact with your content. We're going to look at the kinds of tools that you need to sell with, and really probably what people are most interested in, how do you set realistic revenue expectations for what your program might produce? So before we dive headlong into sales, let's first take a look at what you might be getting yourself into by examining some of the trends and challenges that we see going on right now in ad sales in general, and also within the scholarly publishing community. Now, as you see on the slide there, these really range from the ongoing transition of print and the development of new digital platforms to vendor consolidation in some industries, and media buying really being more transactional now than it ever has been before. So chances are, you're already aware of some of the things happening with print budgets. They have generally been declining in recent years as more and more digital advertising vehicles have come into the picture, for example, mobile. And Folio magazine reported in January of this year that business-to-business advertising pages had dropped, almost 40% or 37% between 2008 and 2013. So that's pretty significant. Consumer publications decreased about 34% during that same time period, and as a result, a lot more publishers are going to a digital-first strategy. However, there is some positive news to share for associations. According to a 2013 survey, again conducted by Folio, print advertising is still the primary source of revenue for associations, followed by paid subscriptions and online media. And as I mentioned a minute ago, media buying has really become much more transactional. With so many tools available these days that, it almost eliminates relationships, which, used to be much more significant in that transaction. And what that means is it's a lot harder to reach decision makers and get your message in front of them. And we'll talk later today about what media buyers are looking for and how they commonly make decisions on what media to buy, and give you kind of some tips as to the approach your staff might take. The last trend I'll mention is that in some industries, and we've really seen this the most maybe in the medical and dental communities, there has been some consolidation. And what I mean by that is larger companies are buying up smaller companies, and the result of that is there might be fewer potential advertisers to reach out to. So when we here at Allen Press on our advertising sales team, when we work with a new client, we usually start with a discovery questionnaire. And the purpose of that is to determine where a society publisher is at in the process of ad sales and where we might be able to help. And today's webinar is going to be a bit like that discovery process. It's really designed to pose a lot of questions so you can determine how to best structure your own program. And always a good first step to take is kind of do an inventory of what you have to offer potential advertisers. And namely, what advertisers want is access to your audience. So how unique is your audience? Usually you're talking to society members, association members, maybe affiliates who read your journal. Maybe they look at your publications website, your society site. In general, they're interacting with you in some way. And you might also have paid subscribers, depending on what you offer, and maybe industry contacts. So advertisers typically find the most value in reaching out to a niche audience that is not duplicated through other things that they're doing. So, said another way, the more unique and unduplicated your audience is, the more valuable it might be to prospective advertisers. And I'm sure that we're all familiar with the idea of demographics. Demographics really tell the story of who your audience is so that you can assess what you have to offer. And it's really important that you have this information at the ready, not only to share with advertisers, but really to help you decide what your audience is worth. Now, as you can see on this slide, advertisers really want to engage individuals who are decision makers, meaning they are directly making decisions on what goods and services to buy, or at the very least, if they're maybe not making the final decision, they're influencing or they're recommending what goods and services to buy. It might also be good to have an awareness of members' titles, what level they hold within the organization, what their budgets are. And depending on your niche or your field, it might be good to know what type of organization someone may be in, such as maybe a hospital, private practice, university setting, or maybe a research facility or lab. It's also a good idea to know how long have people been in their particular field. So we found this to be an interesting trend as well. So there's a 2013 survey that was produced by ASAE, and that's the Center for Association Leadership. And what it found is that market research is really a highly important trend that's impacting associations right now. 62% of the people that responded to this survey said that market research was very important to them, and 32% actually plan to spend more in the coming year. So, people are understanding that they need to know as much as they can about their associations, about their members, and are investing to find that, to get those facts. In general, surveys and focus groups were the most common methods used, and on average, they were being done about once a year to get members' opinions on a whole variety of things. But the more that an organization knows, the easier it is to market to companies in an industry who might be looking for a similar audience. And the good news is, depending on what kinds of information you gather when someone becomes a member, you may already have some of this information if you ask questions, like what type of organization they're in or job title and things like that when people join your association. Now, in case you don't have some of that information, or maybe you have part of it and you want to add more, there are a lot of tools available today like SurveyMonkey, which you might know about, an online survey website. We find that it's very easy to use to create an online survey. People could reply directly online, and results are very easy to tabulate and analyze. And just one note of caution on that, just make sure that the results you get are really statistically valid for the group that you're surveying. So the example that we see on the screen here was done recently by our Allen Press marketing team for the Journal of Endovascular Therapy. And we asked readers to tell us things like the question you see here, what is your primary specialty? And then we wanted to flesh out the profile more, and we asked things like number of years in practice, involvement with equipment purchases, and then a great question, what is your annual budget for equipment and supplies? And the dollar ranges in this question were tailored to the endovascular community, and it's really good to tailor those to whatever's appropriate for your industry or your discipline. So the next step to understanding, what is the potential for ad sales for you would be to do an analysis of competing organizations, their publications, their websites, and really just in general, any other advertising vehicles you can find. So one just really easy and straightforward place to look would be find out if their rate cards are online, so you can see how specific products are priced and maybe what the audience is for the product compared to their circulation and their frequency. Circulation, of course, being how many copies of a printed piece maybe are sent out or distributed, and frequency being how often is it published. And of course, you're going to want to see what kind of volume of advertising do these groups have in their publications or on their websites. So one last slide here on understanding what the market might be for advertising. If you already sell exhibit space at your annual meeting, or maybe you have some other way of engaging businesses in your industry, they are a great resource to find out where do they advertise their products. Are they in fact using media to promote themselves? So they're a great source of information, and I would encourage you to ask questions, listen to their feedback, and really try and understand if they have any unmet needs that you might identify that maybe connecting with your audience would help fulfill. So at this stage, we've evaluated the audience. We've talked about gathering up, kind of a good description of who they are and what they do. We've talked about doing an analysis of the marketplace to see what companies are advertising, what media they use, what kinds of price the competition may be getting for their print or their digital or other media. And now it's time to put all these pieces together into your sales program by establishing what you want to sell, at what cost, and then ultimately setting a revenue goal. So before we look at more specifics, you're going to hear me talk today about sponsorships and advertising. Now, most of the time I'm going to use these terms interchangeably, but there are more specific definitions that I wanted to share with you. These happen to have been highlighted in the spring 2012 issue of Signature Magazine, which, as you might know, is a publication of Association Media and Publishing. And I'm also going to shorten that up by saying AM&P as I go through today's slides. But according to the author of this article, sponsorship is generally considered to be the use or acknowledgement of a name or a logo. And it doesn't really include any of the detailed descriptions of their products and their goods and their services and so on. I'm sure we're all familiar with, brought to you by, and then you see a company's name, but that's about it. Now, on the other side of that equation, advertising consists of messages that do include detailed product descriptions, pricing, maybe an endorsement, other statements of value, and hopefully an incentive or something to induce a purchase. And usually, advertising includes messages from multiple companies. So these are just a couple of things to keep in mind, throughout the presentation today, and then as you consider what to offer. Now, for those of you with printed journals, as you saw earlier, there is still a very significant market for people that are looking to produce print and advertise in print, particularly when you have demographics that indicate your membership, readers, subscribers, etc., not only read their print issue, but we have found there are actually some that still prefer it to digital alternatives. And so that's why it's really important that you gather that information so that you have it ready to share with an advertiser as proof, so to speak, that people really are engaged with your journal. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about customized features that people may use for advertising, and you probably have seen similar things like this as you've looked at other scholarly publications. Depending on the capabilities of your vendor, things like pre-printed inserts can be included with the printed product. They can be placed inside of a polybag wrapper if you happen to mail your journal inside of a clear wrapper. All of these things create a lot of visibility for advertisers, as do cover tips, wraps, and bands. We'll talk a little bit more about cover tips here in a minute. But generally, advertisers really look for visible premium locations and inside front cover, inside back cover, and traditionally the back cover of most printed journals provide those premium locations. Your journal's physical design, it's really important to keep that in mind because it does play a role in how ads can be placed. And you also want to think a little bit about what philosophy your organization may want to take with regard to placing ads next to editorial. So most of the scholarly journals we work with generally place ads as front matter or back matter, and they don't really mix them with inferior content. So having something like this in place may help you avoid, some kind of conflict of interest between your editorial content and paid advertising. And we'll talk a little bit more about that a few slides from now. If your journal is predominantly black and white, and you're trying to think of whether or not you should invest in more color pages, there are some great statistics from a May 2013 article from AM&P's newsletter called Sidebar. A study was done to kind of look at what the recall was of color ads compared to black and white inside of a journal, meaning everything except the covers. And what it found is that regardless of whether or not an ad was, say, a quarter page or a half page, and the industry term for that is fractional, or a full page, so no matter what the size of the ad, color ads were recalled at much higher rates than black and white. And, again, not surprisingly, full page ads were recalled at higher rates regardless of whether or not they were black and white or color. And the author of this newsletter article, it really said publishers should use this kind of information, use these statistics to justify the premiums they charge and to convince advertisers to trade up in size and in color. So, for example, it's not uncommon that if you have an ad space on the back of your journal, within some of the publications that we work with, it's not uncommon to see that that cover may command a price that's, say, 30 to 40% higher than if someone purchased an ad on the interior of the book. So this next example, which I'm really pleased to share with everyone today, it shows an innovative ad program from the Journal of Oral Implantology, or JOI, and it's been sponsored for several years now by one of the industry leaders in oral implantology, Vicon. And what it is a removable cover tip that is placed on the exterior of the journal. In this case, it's placed over the front. And as you can see in the lower left of your screen, I hope, Vicon receives a logo right there on what really is the cover of the journal. So highly, highly visible location. And then if someone were to open that tip or turn the page, then Vicon has a full page ad on the back of that. And then the regular cover of the journal is underneath. So the regular cover of the journal is preserved, and if someone wishes to, the Vicon tip-on can be removed and saved for reference separately. Custom options like this can also be tied to special society or journal milestones. And this example is from the Journal of Endovascular Therapy, which happens to be celebrating its 20th anniversary this year. And our Allen Press Business Development Manager came up with a great idea to promote this message as well as a sponsor with a half-page cover tip. And so as you can see there, Cook Medical logo appears on the cover tip, and again on the other side was an advertisement for a product that they had. So again, wonderful exclusivity. They really, really like the visibility, and I believe that the price on this was somewhere in the $4,000 to $5,000 range. Special supplements to your journal can also be a great opportunity for sponsorship. And again, here we see an example from Cook Medical where they ended up supporting an entire supplement to the Journal of Endovascular Therapy. They had cover recognition in the form of a logo, and then they also had ads inside the piece on the inside back cover, also known as cover 3, as well as the back cover. And as an added bonus, they also received printed copies that they could then give to their sales team and have available at trade shows throughout the year. So when it came time to set a price for this program, what the society and the business development manager looked at is, coming up with a cost that would, allow everyone to cover production, postage, details like that, plus a profit. And it was not an inexpensive offering, but it's important to keep in mind that, demand for this is going to fluctuate based on what's going on in the industry, whether an advertiser is launching a new product, and really the general sales outlook. I also wanted to say a word about ethics at this point. So consider how sponsorship might affect your journal beyond ad revenue. There's a lot to think about here, and I kind of mentioned this earlier when we talked a little bit about adjacency to editorial. Is advertising and sponsorship being done in a way that helps you avoid conflicts of interest? And I wanted to share a couple of really good resources. You might be familiar with the Handbook of Journal Publishing and also the organization COPE, which stands for Committee on Publication Ethics. COPE, which has a wonderful website, is a great reference for editors and for association society leaders that are looking for ways to address certain issues. And they go into a lot of detail, but they're really good resources, and they do touch on how to handle things like commercial support. The last thing I wanted to note on here, if you happen to be in a medically related field and your publication is indexed in PubMed, you may know already that they have very specific guidelines that do require publishers to declare sponsorship of articles that they index. And again, the purpose of that is to avoid, the appearance that someone has purchased, if you will, editorial content, because that might create quite a conflict with the science and the results and the blending of those two. And so they want to have a clear delineation between commercial support and scientific results. Now, I know we're all familiar with banner ads on websites, and we see them on a regular basis. Here's an example that shows two, very prominently placed ad positions at the top of one of our cooperative publishing partner sites. Again, this happens to be the Journal of Endovascular Therapy, and our partner in this case is the American Academy of Implant Dentistry. Those two banner ads actually appear throughout the entire site, and because of that visibility, they have a higher price. And going back a minute to the Handbook of Journal Publishing, they also have a couple of great ideas in there. Typical online options for banner ad placement might be, say next to an article abstract, or maybe it's packaged along with an emailed table of contents alert. And there's other things that you probably have seen if you've looked around, I know at any of our Pinnacle sites. We also have ad positions, maybe next to an editor's top article picks or most viewed articles. So the purpose there is, to try and place ads next to content that people are looking at already, again, for visibility. And it's always great to utilize any unsold ad space you might have. You can promote society events or maybe products you want to draw attention to, even including something like an annual meeting or maybe a CME program. And the example that we're looking at here today comes to us from the Pediatric and Developmental Pathology Journal, and this just happens to be a house ad for advertising. If your journal happens to have a mobile edition, you might already be thinking about, how can I put an ad on the mobile edition? And these examples here again are from the Journal of Endovascular Therapy. We are seeing a lot of increased mobile usage, even on websites that are not optimized for mobile viewing. So we expect to see that trend continue, and I think it would be a great place for a sponsor or an ad. And as you can see there in the kind of teal colored boxes, you can see where a promotional message might appear on both the tablet view and then on the phone view. So the things you have to think about would be, how many people are using mobile devices for your content, what's the size of the audience, and what are maybe other people in your industry charging. On digital editions, which are also known as flip books, as they're sometimes called, they can be a great option for content, but right now we're seeing them more commonly used for maybe member publications than we're seeing in scholarly research. Most platforms, including our own Bright Copy format, give advertisers a whole host of additional features that they can purchase, such as direct links from, the ad that we're seeing here on the left-hand side with the headline interactive. Someone were to click on that, they could go directly to that advertiser's website. Wonderful. You can also do, all kinds of digital inserts, belly bands, another industry term for something that might wrap a journal. And then there's, the added advantage that digital editions can do, so many other things that print can't. For example, adding videos. And publishers have a great opportunity to collect data on usage to see, exactly how readers are interacting with the content, and not to mention discussion and social media tools. One last thing to keep in mind as you think about digital editions of flipbooks, or maybe you're considering getting one. If you already have advertising in your print journal and you're thinking about a move to a digital platform, you might see somewhat of a drop in your print revenue if audience moves away from the printed journal to a digital edition. So keep that in mind. And again, reader surveys really tell the story. So if you can document the audience you have for print and the audience you have for your flipbook, your new products, that's really how advertisers are going to make a lot of their decisions. Okay, now I mentioned ETOCs earlier. That's the electronic table of contents. And most platforms for journal websites these days allow users to sign up for various alerts, including when new content is posted. So here we see an example from the Journal of Endovascular Therapy, where a banner ad is prominently featured, kind of right beneath the journal's own banner, and then a very short message from the editor. And then below that, which you can't really see on the screen, then there is a listing of all of the articles in the current issue underneath. Prices for these, again, they're really going to vary depending on how many people have signed up for the alert, and back to that audience question again, and what the market will bear in a particular industry. So some advantages to think about from the advertiser's perspective. Vehicles like this, you can really do a lot with customization. A lot of the platforms and softwares you put these out today, you can really customize, the size, the shape, the look, the feel. It really can be customized exactly the way you would want. And it's another great opportunity to do an exclusive, meaning just one advertiser or one sponsor per alert. And that can, be an advantage in two ways. One, it's a higher value for the advertiser, but it also makes for a cleaner and less cluttered experience for the reader. Your society newsletter, whether you happen to do a print edition or a digital edition, those are tried and true places as well for advertisers to engage with members. If you're thinking about maybe adding that. Advantages, again, to advertisers, the distribution, you know what that is, so you can let your advertiser know, this is how many newsletters I email out links to, or this is how many newsletters I mail, so that's very specific. And in general, these things are considered to be member benefits, right? They're part of the members' dues that they pay to belong to your association or your society. And meetings and events. So any of us who have ever hosted an annual meeting or attended, any kind of industry function, you know that the marketing and advertising opportunities that go along with these, there's a whole host of things that can be done. So this happens to be, just a short example, preliminary program, again, from our co-publishing partner, AID. There's on-site programs. There's email messages that can go out to sponsors during the meeting, or go out on behalf of sponsors, rather, during the meeting. And then we're also seeing more and more organizations take advantage of mobile meeting apps. And, of course, those can carry sponsor messaging, too. So lots and lots of options around that. Now, another revenue opportunity might come in the form of commercial reprints. And traditionally, these have literally been paper copies of journal articles that a company may wish to purchase because maybe a device or product that that company manufactures has been mentioned favorably in in an article. And that can have a lot of value for a company. It adds credibility. It's something that they can use in their marketing efforts to say, look, this device that we have, look at how that was tested. It was a success, and then they use that as part of their messaging. So to facilitate this kind of thing usually requires working with a vendor or someone that can help, facilitate the sale, set the terms for usage, and then, of course, customize it with maybe the company's logo, maybe an ad, and, of course, fulfill the actual printing. Now, this screen here shows just a sample of what an e-print might look like for Allen Press. And we're seeing a trend towards e-prints where the concept of a company making a purchase is very much the same as what I just described for print, except that it's done digitally. So instead of receiving a paper copy, companies would purchase a specific number of views instead of a specific number of copies, and they receive a link that they can then distribute to their end users. So, if you compare the two, e-prints might be more efficient to distribute. They're very easy to replenish. Once you've used up your views, you just buy more. And usage is very trackable. Now, one thing to keep in mind, if you happen to be in an industry that's medically related, where there are pharmaceutical companies or people making medical devices, there's some relatively new compliance reporting called the Sunshine Act. The full name is a bit lengthier. It's officially known, this may take me a second, it's officially known as the Physician Payments Sunshine Act, and is part of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. Did you get every word of that? So it's under this law that companies that make medical devices and pharmaceuticals, they're required to report payments or transfers of value to physicians and teaching hospitals. And why would they have to do that? Well, the law is intended to bring transparency to these transactions. So believe it or not, a commercial reprint, a printed copy of an article that a company may give a doctor to say, look at how great our drug did in this trial, believe it or not, that may be construed as a gift. So on an annual basis, there is actually a limit of $100 per year that a company can't give more than $100 worth of gifts on an annual basis. So these are some things to keep in mind if you're considering adding a program like this to generate revenue. And recently I saw a white paper by a commercial publisher, Walters Kluwer, in which they pointed out that the CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, these requirements are really open to interpretation. And some in the industry have interpreted that maybe an e-print that you can only view, you can't download, so technically nothing has been given, that they may actually be exempt from this recording requirement. In other words, a company wouldn't have to say, hey, I sent a link to an article to this physician. But it's also a very open to interpretation piece of legislation still. And as you can imagine, there's been quite a bit of pushback from some parts of the industry to it. So this is something you should just be cautious about if you're planning to launch such a program. Okay, so now that you've decided what advertising options to offer, now it's time to think about price. We've already touched on the importance of understanding, okay, what is your competition charging? But it's also important to look at what's going on in your particular industry from an economic standpoint. A lot of industries were affected in the 2008, 2009 economic downturn, and we still see some of the effects of that as we work with customers today. So if companies in your industry have cut back on their advertising investments, it may be a lot harder to go to them now to try and convince them to add your new journal or your new website, your new digital offering, unless you have an audience that's truly in demand. And then, of course, there's simple logistics. Your pricing may need to reflect any additional production costs, let's say that come up with adding color ads to your journal because now it's black and white. Or maybe you want to send an e-blast to members and you need a piece of software to do that. Or maybe you just need to look at staff costs to figure out how much you can invest in sales outreach. Now, all of these costs are going to vary depending on where you see the opportunity and how much time you want to devote to sales. So when it comes to actual pricing models, for print, if you were to glance at any rate card that you might run across, you're going to see that printed prices are usually built around how many insertions an advertiser might commit to. Usually it's maybe 3 or 6 months or a year. Color rates are usually higher, as I mentioned earlier, along with cover positions. And so a lot of publishers are bundling together various print and digital products and maybe offering a discount if the advertiser purchases those things as a bundle, but still offering a la carte, meaning someone could always buy an additional single ad or single page or single banner should the need arise. Special supplements, again, are a great opportunity to invite new advertisers or infrequent advertisers if that supplement has a certain theme. So it's a great way to reach out and say, hey, we're doing a special supplement on some particular hot topic within an industry, and that might engage someone that you've been trying to sell advertising to but haven't been successful. And last but not least, discounts may also be incentives for corporate members of your society or maybe exhibitors. For example, if you designate an issue of your journal as a conference issue, it would be great to reach out to exhibitors and offer them an incentive price and then maybe distribute additional copies on site at a meeting. Now, pricing digital is a little bit different than print. In general, digital advertising does not command as high a price when you compare the cost per thousand to what print can drive. So that may mean that you have to sell more digital ads or real estate, if you will, than print to make up the difference. And I just wanted to share one article here from the blog Scholarly Kitchen. Kent Anderson, who's a frequent contributor to that, points out just some of the challenges associated with the transition from print to digital and indicates, again, that web ads simply don't command as high a price as print. And publishers, as they're trying to meet the needs of their readers and their subscribers who might be requesting digital vehicles, again, if there's advertising involved, that's a bit of a challenge to retain that revenue in a digital environment and then grow it. And he also briefly touches on the concept of native advertising. And if you've heard that term before, you might know it's the practice of putting sponsored content or advertorial in places that, if you or I were just looking at a website, we might not realize right away, oh, that's a paid advertorial. We might mistake it as regular news content. In a member publication or maybe a trade publication, or I'll just throw out the CNN website, that's fairly traditional, but in a scholarly publication, when there might be ethical conflicts, if it were to be confused with peer-reviewed content, that's generally not something that we see. So we're not really seeing an uptake on native advertising in scholarly publishing. So on to some more specifics now about how to price online. There are multiple online pricing models, and a July 2014 AM&P newsletter article kind of got at a few of those. And I'm just going to share 2 of them with you today. The cost per thousand model, or CPM, is probably the most prevalent, and it's very simple. Basically, a flat rate is charged every time an ad is displayed 1,000 times. So for publishers, it's very easy to see the kind of revenue that you might bring in, and all you have to do is display an ad for a set period of time. So easy to calculate, display the ad. For a publisher, that's great. For an advertiser, these days they really want more immediate return on investment. And if their ad is just being displayed, that's great, but it may not be as specific as they like. Nevertheless, AM&P reports in July that 33% of internet ad revenues still came from this pricing model in 2013. The cost per click model, just kind of like the name says, is based on charging a fee every time someone clicks on an ad that you have on your website. So from the advertiser perspective, it's great because results, again, are immediate and they're measurable. So for publishers, it's less predictable. It's harder to know. Really, you can't know ahead of time how many times people will click on an ad. And ultimately, when people do click on an ad, they're going away from your website. So keep that in mind. Again, cost per thousand is what we're seeing used most often. Most, if not all, web content platforms, and this includes our own Pinnacle platform, they provide a whole variety of analytics so that you can see what parts of the site visitors are visiting. And these statistics, when you combine them with something like Google Analytics for more detail, can really give a great picture of the impact that your site is having for advertisers. So we look at things like total and unique visitors, and this gives metrics that we then, as the red arrow is showing here, we include page views and unique visits on advertiser rate cards so that people can get a clear idea of the audience. And I did want to point out, Google recently updated the names of some of their terms, and they're now using users, which formerly had been unique visitors, and sessions, which formerly was visits. So all of this is to say, have this information available and be prepared to discuss it with advertisers. Now, once you do run an ad campaign on your site, advertisers are going to expect to get a report that might look like the example that you see here. This is what one of our Pinnacle reports may look like. It gives you the reporting period for the ad, the advertiser name, but really what they want to see is how many times did people click through on an ad and how many unique people may have seen it. A final word on pricing, there definitely are some things you want to avoid. And Scott Osier here for A&P talks about, assuming you've done your homework as to what the market will bear, you know your audience, don't be shy about pricing your products accordingly. Don't undervalue them and don't overly discount merely to attract advertisers. So Scott says that, if you were to do those things, you might give people the notion that your audience is not as valuable as you say, and there's a kind of a logistical catch too. People may want to negotiate with you every time they place an ad. So the next step in the process really is to look at revenue goals. And in order to do that, you're going to want to create some kind of sales forecast. And I'm sure you do this already, in different parts of your organization. You'll want to look, what does the prospect pool look like? How many people do you have in your pipeline? How much inventory do you have set aside for advertising, both print, online, whatever is in the product mix that you've decided to offer? And of course, again, what are your sales resources? How much staff time do you have to devote to this? It's important to remember, too, it's going to take more time to begin a program. And of course, once you establish one, then you have to maintain it. So more time to set up, but then the maintenance end, keeping artwork fresh for advertisers, maintaining your visibility with them, sharing results like the example we saw with ad metrics, and then hopefully renewing their contracts for a future period of time. Also keep in mind, if you are considering advertising in a printed product, the United States Postal Service has some guidelines related to periodical ad permit rates, or ad rates rather, postal rates, that you're going to want to keep in mind. So your vendor should be able to help you with that, but make sure that you are not inflating your ad sales forecasts beyond the percentage that you might need to limit your ads in your journal. You're also going to want to periodically review your program at least once a year and see how your results are stacking up compared to the goals that you set. The big thing is really seeing what's going on in the marketplace. Are advertisers changing their mix? Are they asking for new vehicles that maybe you don't offer? What's happening with product development? Are companies launching new products, or is the market really mature and there's not a lot of new product development going on? So the answers to all of these things, as I'm sure you can figure out, really affect your sales program and the mix and what kinds of goals you can have over time. You may need to adjust those goals depending on what you find. Pilot or test projects can be a wonderful way to kind of launch a new vehicle and gauge how readers or advertisers might respond. So this example that you see here comes from the Journal of Oral Implantology, again. And back in 2008, AAID had launched a print glossary of some of the terms most commonly used by implant dentists. And their vision for this was to engage a student audience and distribute the piece to them. Some of the costs were partially offset with advertising, but then, over the next couple of years, that interest kind of waned and the project sort of stalled. So we worked with them to relaunch, or we are in the process, I should say, of relaunching it this fall as a free online publication on the journal's website. We're going to use the Bright Copy flipbook format, and we're currently in the process of marketing it to sponsors. We're going to get recognition on the website as well as in the promotional materials. And so we envision something that may have as many as 3,000 terms. Hopefully, it will have a lot of use with our marketing plan that we will launch. So stay tuned as the year goes on. So now it's time to bring together everything that you've researched and planned into some kind of informative message that you can use to engage advertisers. So in the next few slides, we're going to look at what to include in your media kit, how to develop a sales message, how to engage advertising agencies, which is always a challenge, and what advantages associations may have when competing with trade publications if you have those in your particular industry. So this is a short checklist of things that we find to be most useful in a media kit. A media kit is usually where media buyers and advertisers look for all the specifics on advertising options that you have. You'll want to have some easy-to-read charts, back to that audience demographic information we talked about earlier, what their buying power is, what pricing options you have, and then a lot of technical details like production deadlines, maybe it's image resolution for print, and so forth. So AM&P says a media kit needs to ultimately, tell readers who's going to see their ads, give clear pricing, and make it easy for people to complete a space reservation. And the reason I included this image is because if you do decide to link your media kit from your site, do make it easy for people to find. Our publishing partner AID here, I think it's just 2 clicks off of their navigation bar and you can get right to where it says advertise in JOI. And these are just 2 examples of rate cards we've developed for advertising sales clients. They're actually 2-sided pieces, but they, I think, meet all the requirements that we just talked about. You'll also want to develop some clear and easy to follow sales contracts, which you might also hear referred to as insertion orders. And these are really your written record of what an advertiser has ordered. Maybe it's price, discount, frequency, color, anything that you and your customer have agreed on. Most organizations want to have the right to review and refuse ads, should anyone present them with something that they would choose not to publish. And if you decide to do that, you're going to want to have that plainly stated in your rate card as well as your sales contract. Think about what would happen if someone wanted to cancel an ad. Would you charge a fee, or would you try and get them to fulfill it at a later date? And so that's something you might want to continue or might want to include. If you have payment terms, and net 30 is the most common, that's something else to list. And then think about your discounting policy. You'll want to have some flexibility for negotiation and customization if you decide to develop packages, like I mentioned earlier, for special issues and sponsorships. Advertising agencies are generally accustomed to receiving about a 15% discount off of your standard rates, so that's something else to keep in mind. Okay, so you've made a sale, now what? Well, you're going to want to have a few mechanisms in place to send an invoice, accept payments, including credit cards and wire transfers, and you'll want to have some kind of staff set up to handle collections if anyone pays late. And you're going to want to review artwork ahead of publication to see that it matches either what your printer needs or what your website requires. So with all of that hard work behind us, what do we actually say to potential advertisers? How do we answer the question, what does it mean to me? What does it mean to them? How do we communicate value and educate them on what we have to offer? Scott Ozier, in this August 2013 Sidebar article, noted associations have some really great inherent benefits that he thinks everyone should make the most of associations usually have a fairly stable membership. In other words, your members are not brand new every year. You have a lot of repeat customers, as he describes it, and that means you have a really targeted audience that are interested specifically in what that association supports. They're usually very engaged, and actually, hey, they've paid money to be a part of this association. So they may also look at the association as a trusted resource. So you might want to take this educational approach and communicate some of these value points along with your audience demographics and what their buying power is. Now, depending on what industry that you do work in, at one time or another, you will likely end up selling to a marketing director or media buyer at an agency. Agencies are still relying heavily on the RFP, or the request for proposal, and that usually requires that you provide a lot of detailed information about your rates, products, distribution, and so on in a document they provide. So they're looking to you to answer their questions rather than them sifting through your rate card in many cases. A March 2014 Folio magazine article asked the question, are ad sales really becoming a numbers game? Media buyers these days have such an increased workload, more responsibility, that they are relying more and more on data and less on personal relationships. And I know we see this in the contacts we make. Media buyers also frequently change, so keep these things in mind. 94% of agency respondents in this article that I mentioned, overwhelming number, 94%, said that total cost was still a deciding factor for them ultimately on what to buy. So regardless of everything else, money spoke the loudest. Their advice to publishers was to try and understand the needs of the advertisers more instead of really just talking about themselves. I mentioned the RFP was still significant. 82% said that's still what they rely on when purchasing media. It's also important to understand the sales cycle, meaning, when do people make buying decisions? 63% of media buyers say that they are actually buying media throughout the year. And, this is a little different than the traditional fall media buying preparation for the upcoming year. So that can make it a little bit more challenging to plan your outreach. So keep that in mind. So as you think about making connections with media buyers, and you think about, putting yourself in the position to go and make a sales call, I wanted to share a few notes from a session that I attended at this year's AM&P meeting in Washington, D.C. And it was really a fun session. Diane Russignola, she described herself as a newbie to ad sales when she became an association publisher, while her co-presenter was a seasoned sales veteran and is publisher for Physics Today. And here are just some highlights from their presentation. There's also a link here if you want to see all of their slides. They really promoted taking a consultative sales approach. Listen closely, try and identify unmet needs, and remember you have to set yourself apart from the competition. And they had some really great humorous examples of how they have done that. We all appreciate good customer service, so do follow through on what you say you're going to do. So last, here is a very short list of some of the resources I've mentioned today, and then a complete list of references for all of the articles and things will be in the slides online. So that wraps up our session today. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us, and good luck on all of your future sales projects.
Thanks, Maria. I did get a couple of questions. I know we're pretty close to time, but we'll go ahead and stick around and do the Q&A session for as long as we continue to get questions. So you can feel free to continue to chat those in as we go. So starting out, one of our participants wanted to know, how big should their audience really be to attract advertisers? Do you find that there's a lower limit where if a particular publication or even outlet, of that publication doesn't have enough users that it's not really worth the time?
That is an excellent question. And in fact, we do see that coming up when we work with potential clients. On the print side, I think probably the lowest circulation we may offer right now in the industry it's in is maybe about 1,100 to 1,200 copies in print. But it's really about the bigger picture of how valuable is that audience. So even though, we might look at that 1,200 and know that that's not 5,000, if the audience is unique enough and you have member demographics to say, look, we're reaching decision makers, that still may be very valuable.
Great. So the size is a factor, but the makeup of that audience is definitely a factor as well.
Definitely.
Okay. One fairly specific question. You had mentioned some statistics that demonstrate that a full page ad has more impact than a half page, and that color has more impact than a black and white page. And we were just wondering if you could direct us to that particular source in your references slide.
Yes, I would be happy to do that. In fact, it will be on the references slide. And if you would like to chat your email address, I would be more than happy to make sure you get to that particular article, just so that you can start looking at it right away.
So also, this I thought was a really interesting question. Is it worth inviting agencies to a meeting to educate them about your journal? Have some sort of open day for agencies maybe?
Sure, if that's something that you can easily do within your industry, maybe there's an annual meeting in a major city or some kind of forum. If you literally meet an in-person meeting, I would think that would be a great opportunity. You might also find it convenient to, have some kind of open house that you host digitally, for example. That might be more convenient.
So when it comes to the contracts that sort of surround advertising insertion orders, if I don't know how to write a contract, is it okay to use a generic one I found online?
I think there's lots of examples. I know we have quite a few in our cooperative publishing partners, which we have a link on our Allen Press website, that would give you an idea of some of the terms and conditions on rate cards. And they're not actual contracts, but I'm sure, again, if you'd like to chat your email address to us, I'd be more than happy to share a sample.
Great. So the last question I have is, what factors are there that help determine if it's better to work with an ad agency or manage sales within an organization?
Again, a great question. So it really just comes down to, I think, the resources and time that you have. There's a lot of benefit to handling things in-house, if you will, and if your advertising options are going to be fairly limited, easy to manage, and you have ways to handle things like invoicing, then that may be to scale. If you are in a larger, more competitive industry where there's going to need to be repeated sales pressure or contacts, then it might be better to work with an outside source that can devote the time that is necessary, especially if you're trying to get a program off the ground.
Great. Thanks for those answers, Maria. I also do want to point out that if you would ever like to consult Allen Press about your advertising sales needs, I have just a brief description of how we support our advertising clients. We have a couple of different options. We have an administrative support level that really means you call on advertisers and make the sales yourself, but we do pre-flighting for the artwork, and we also do invoicing and collection. And then we also have an outbound sales offering, which is more full service, where we would work with you to develop rates, create a rate card, prospect and gain revenue. Plus, we would do all the things I mentioned with the administrative level. So in that case, we would actually go after sales. And then we also have we offer a consultative package in which we would work closely with you to help you develop a program and set up your advertising vehicles, rates, help you do a little bit of prospecting just to get your program off the ground and then let you continue to manage it. So if you think that's something we can help with, please feel free to get in touch with your Allen Press account manager or business development director here at Allen Press. So that is it for today. I do want to thank Maria and all of our participants today. I hope you enjoyed today's presentation and that you gained some valuable insight into the advertising sales market in scholarly publishing. As always, we will be sending out a brief survey that will include links to both the slides and a video recording of today's session. Please do take a few moments to complete the survey. We're always looking for your feedback on how we can improve future webinars, as well as suggestions for future topics. And don't forget, if you'd like to tweet about today's webinar or make comments on the Facebook page, we welcome that as well. That concludes our session for today. Thank you.